The desert stretched like an unfinished prayer, its silence louder than any sermon Elias had ever preached. The sun bruised the horizon with gold and blood, and every breath he drew felt borrowed from a God he no longer trusted. Once he had spoken of faith with conviction. Now, only sand answered him. If forgiveness heals the soul, why does guilt feel so divine? His cassock clung to his back, soaked with sweat and shame. He thought of the altar he had abandoned, the confessions left unspoken. A wind rose, a whisper more than sound, and in its hush, a voice recited scripture, soft and wrong, like a hymn sung backward. Elias turned. The stranger's eyes gleamed with recognition, as if they had met before, in dreams or damnation. Man shall not live by bread alone, the voice said, smiling. Elias felt the weight of every word pressing against his silence, and in that silence, something ancient began to stir. Elias walked beside the stranger, their shadows weaving together on the sand. Every word Lucian spoke dripped with scripture, yet each verse struck like accusation. The silence between them was heavier than stone. Elias's mind wandered to Father Anselm's warning. The devil often comes with truth on his tongue. He longed for a sign, anything divine, anything clear. But heaven gave him only mirage. He thought of the voice that had once guided his sermons, now distant as thunder in another world. When Lucian recited again, his tone softened. If you are the son of faith, command these stones to become bread. Elias stopped walking. Hunger gnawed, not for food, but for certainty. He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. They stopped by a dry riverbed, cracked earth forming veins beneath their feet. Lucian's voice echoed off invisible walls. Verses of Psalms turned inside out. Elias's mind burned with memory. Mara's laughter, Father Anselm's voice, the cross he had buried. The stranger's words bent reality, and every breath felt like confession. You know the scriptures, Lucian said gently, but do you know the author? Elias stared at him, unsure whether he faced a teacher or a mirror. That night, Elias built a small fire. The flames painted his face in trembling gold. Across from him, Lucian sat in silence, his expression unreadable. Sparks rose like prayers that never reached heaven. The wind whispered old psalms through the dunes. Elias's eyes drifted shut, and in the fire's heart, he saw Mara's face again, beautiful, accusing. You left me for silence, she said. He woke gasping, but Lucian hadn't moved. Only his eyes gleamed, reflecting the flames. Before dawn, Elias awoke to the sound of pages turning. Lucian knelt nearby, whispering into his open Bible. His voice rose, echoing softly through the emptiness. He will give his angels charge over you. Elias rose to his feet, trembling. Then why am I still alone? He whispered. The question hung between them like smoke. Lucian smiled faintly, and for the first time, Elias noticed the absence of footprints behind him. Morning came without mercy. The desert's chill gave way to the rising heat, and with it, Lucian's voice filled the emptiness again. He quoted from Psalms, his tone tender as a lullaby yet sharp enough to wound. Elias followed, half listening, half questioning whether the words still belonged to heaven. You speak as though you've known God, Elias said finally. Lucian smiled. I knew his silence before you did. The reply struck deeper than accusation. It felt like truth disguised as venom. Around them, the dunes shimmered, bending the horizon into something unreal. Elias wanted to answer, but his faith had become a tongue he no longer spoke. By noon, they reached a cluster of jagged rocks shaped like forgotten altars. Lucian rested there, reciting words that Elias once taught others. Each verse he spoke carried weight, as though the desert itself leaned closer to listen. You preached these once, Lucian murmured. What changed? Elias knelt beside the stones, his knees sinking into burning sand. God stopped speaking. Lucian tilted his head, studying him. Or perhaps, he said, you stopped listening. The silence that followed pressed against Elias's ribs, until he thought his heart might break beneath it. As the afternoon faded, Lucian's tone softened to almost compassion. He spoke of mercy, of purpose, of divine hunger satisfied through obedience. The words tangled inside Elias, sweet and poisonous at once. He remembered Father Anselm's voice from years past, steady, patient, warning him that truth twisted becomes temptation. Elias clutched his rosary again, feeling each bead as though counting scars. If you are the son of faith, Lucian whispered, then feed yourself. Elias stared at the stone in his hand. For a moment it almost looked like bread. When night returned, the wind carried whispers of hymns long forgotten. Lucian built no fire, claiming the stars were enough. He quoted again, verses of promise, of kingdoms and crowns. Elias' stomach twisted, but not from hunger. The stranger's calm voice made faith sound like vanity. You seek silence, Lucian said, but silence serves no king. Elias stared at the sky, stars burning like eyes. Then maybe I serve none. For the first time, Lucian's expression flickered. His smile dimmed, as though the night itself had dared to speak back. Dawn crept over the dunes like forgiveness that arrives too late. Elias awoke to find Lucian watching him, seated cross-legged with the same calm. Between them, the Bible lay open on the sand. You cannot win against silence, Lucian said quietly. It devours everything. Elias reached forward and closed the book. Then let it devour me. For the first time, Lucian looked uncertain. The desert wind stilled, the sky hushed, and somewhere in that fragile stillness, Elias felt the faintest pulse of something alive, small as hope, vast as heaven. Night sank deep into the dunes, and sleep came to Elias like a thief. The desert air cooled, pressing close around him. He dreamed of bells ringing underwater, of voices praying in reverse. Out of the dark mist stepped Mara, her face pale, her eyes the color of unshed rain. You left me for silence, she whispered, the same words that haunted his firelit dream. Elias tried to answer, but his voice cracked in the wind. I left you for God, he said finally. Then why does he still sound like me? She asked. Her question cut through him like broken glass. The desert blurred. The stars flickered out. He reached for her hand, but she vanished into mist, leaving behind only the echo of her breath, and the scent of incense burned long ago. He woke trembling, breath caught between prayer and scream. Lucian was gone. Only the vast quiet remained. The sky pulsed faintly with dawn, and Elias felt a presence, feminine, tender, but cold. You cannot bury what you love in holy ground. Mara's voice murmured from nowhere and everywhere. He turned in circles, seeing her form flicker at the edge of the horizon. Why do you torment me? He shouted. I only remind you, she said, of the life you crucified for faith. The words struck him harder than any temptation. He sank to his knees, whispering apologies to air that did not answer. Later, as the sun burned high, Elias found a single white flower growing from a crack in the sand. Its petals reminded him of Mara's laughter, the sound that once drew him toward belief rather than away from it. He knelt beside it, feeling an ache that words could not soothe. Even the desert remembers her, he murmured. From behind, Lucian's voice returned, smooth as silk over a blade. The desert remembers only what you refuse to forget. Elias turned. Lucian stood watching him, the same calm smile curving his lips. She was never your sin, Lucian said, only your escape. That night, Mara returned again, closer than before. Her eyes glowed softly in the starlight, her face free of accusation this time. "You were right to leave," she said, "but you were wrong to forget." Elias reached out, his hand trembling as it passed through her form. She smiled. A sad, knowing smile that seemed to carry centuries. "What is faith without memory?" she asked. Elias wanted to answer, but tears rose unbidden. Behind her, Lucien's figure appeared, faint and still, watching them both. For a moment, Elias could not tell which of them was real. By dawn, Mara's voice faded with the stars. Elias rose, weaker yet strangely calm. He could still hear her final whisper. "Remember me when you pray to silence." Lucien waited beside him, unbothered, serene. "Did you speak with your ghost?" he asked. "She is no ghost," Elias replied. "She is what I buried when I chose to be holy." Lucien smiled faintly. "Then holiness was your first grave." Elias turned from him, eyes glinting with defiance. The wind stirred around them again, carrying her scent, jasmine and ash. Through the golden morning, something in his soul began to shift. By the third morning, the desert opened to a valley of broken stones and glimmering glass. The ruins shimmered like water, each fragment catching the sunlight and throwing it back in wounded brilliance. Lucien called it a sanctuary. Elias felt it was a trap. "Every man finds his truth here," Lucien said, stepping between the scattered mirrors. Each reflected him in endless variations. Older, younger, crowned, crucified. Elias followed reluctantly, the ground crunching beneath his boots. In one shard, he saw himself kneeling before an unseen altar. In another, Mara's eyes stared back, filled with tears that were not hers. "What do you see?" Lucien asked softly. Elias whispered, "Everything I tried to bury." Lucien moved among the mirrors as if greeting old friends. Each reflection bent to his will, whispering verses in his own voice. Elias felt dizzy, watching the faces speak and vanish. "They show what faith hides," Lucien said. "The truth beneath your prayers." Elias stepped closer to one. His reflection grinned back before he did. His stomach turned. "Is this your gospel?" he asked. "It's yours," Lucien replied. Written in fear, sealed by silence. The words echoed through the glass, repeating until it sounded like an army of voices mocking him. Elias pressed his palms to his ears, but the noise came from within. The deeper they ventured, the quieter the desert became, as though the world itself held its breath. At the temple's heart stood a single unbroken mirror. It reflected nothing but a faint shimmer of light. "This one shows what God sees," Lucien said. Elias stared into it, and saw only emptiness. No face, no body. Not even his own shadow. The void looked back with compassion. He felt his chest tighten, as though every unanswered prayer had gathered here, waiting to be heard. "If this is what God sees," he whispered, "then perhaps silence is mercy." Lucien's expression darkened, his reflection warping in the still glass. Lucien's voice sharpened. "You see nothing because you are nothing." His words echoed across the temple, brittle and cold. Elias turned toward him, fury and sorrow mingling in his eyes. "Then what are you?" Lucien smiled. A fragile human smile that cracked at the edges. "I am what's left when faith stops pretending." The mirrors around them began to tremble. Fragments lifted from the ground, spinning slowly in the air like broken stars. Elias shouted over the rising hum, "If silence is emptiness, then why do you fear it?" Lucien's face twisted, the first crack of emotion breaking through his composure. When the last shard fell, silence returned, heavy and absolute. Elias stood bleeding from a cut on his palm, the mirror's edge glinting crimson. Lucien watched, his expression unreadable, eyes shadowed by something close to grief. "Now you understand," he said. "Faith and doubt are mirrors facing each other. Endless reflections, endless hunger." Elias looked at the blood on his hand, then pressed it to the cracked glass before him. "No, won't you?" Elias looked at the blood on his hand, then pressed it to the cracked glass before him. The mirror absorbed it, glowing faintly before going still. "Then I'll break the reflection," he whispered. Lucian turned away, the faintest tremor of fear in his voice. "Be careful what you shatter." The desert darkened beneath a gathering storm. Clouds crawled across the sky like wounded beasts, their bellies swollen with thunder. Elias felt the air thicken, as if heaven itself were holding breath. Lucian walked ahead, his white robes now streaked with sand. "You've seen truth," he said over the rising wind. "Now speak it." Elias's voice trembled. "Truth cannot be shouted." Lucian turned sharply, his calm breaking. "Then let it be tested." Lightning split the horizon, a line of light between them. Elias clenched his hands, the wound in his palm reopening. He looked upward, eyes wet with dust and prayer. The silence pressed harder than the storm. The storm raged without mercy. Lucian's voice rose above it, quoting scripture louder than thunder. "Command the stones, and they will obey." The words echoed like blades against stone. Elias closed his eyes, pressing his bleeding palm against his chest. "I command nothing," he whispered. "Not heaven, not heaven, not hell." The wind tore at them both. Lucian advanced, his Bible open, pages flapping like wings. "Then you serve no God," he shouted. Elias looked up, eyes fierce through the storm. "Perhaps God serves none." Lightning struck between them, the sand bursting upward in molten light. For an instant, both men were statues carved from fire. The storm began to speak in voices. Mara's laughter, Father Anselm's calm, the echo of Elias's own prayers. He covered his ears, crying out, "Enough!" But the wind answered with Lucian's tone. "The silence you worship is only the echo of your guilt." Elias fell to his knees. "Then why does it still comfort me?" he whispered. The air fell still for a heartbeat, as though heaven paused to listen. Then Lucian whispered close, "Because even your silence is afraid to be alone." Elias lifted his head and for the first time smiled, not in defiance, but in recognition. Lucian stepped back, lowering his Bible. "You choose silence," he said, almost gently. Elias rose, water and dust streaking his face. "Silence is all I have left." Lucian's eyes softened, not with pity but with memory. "Then answer this. If God's voice never returns, will you still believe?" Elias looked at him, trembling but steady. Belief doesn't wait for permission. The storm slowed to a whisper, the air electric but calm. For a moment, Lucian seemed smaller, his grandeur fading like smoke in sunlight. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was alive. The wind died. The sky cleared, revealing the first stars of evening. Elias stood alone on the dune, breath shallow, heart echoing like a drum of prayer. Lucian's voice came faintly behind him, no longer commanding, almost pleading. "Speak, and end this." Elias turned but did not answer. He simply knelt, hands open, eyes lifted toward the vast, unbroken silence above. For the first time he felt it not as punishment, but presence. The devil waited, but heaven said nothing. And in that nothing, Elias found everything. The desert glowed pale under a silver dawn. Elias walked through the hush left by the storm, his footprints the only movement across the unbroken sand. Lucian followed at a distance, no longer radiant, his white robes dulled, his face drawn and weary. "You've won nothing," he said quietly. Silence is not salvation. Elias stopped and turned, his expression softer now, almost compassionate. Then, tell me, Lucian, he said, what have you been seeking all this time? The question hung heavy. Lucian looked down at his trembling hands. An echo, he murmured. Something to answer back. Elias nodded. Then we've both been praying to the same silence. As morning ripened, they came upon a lone acacia tree, its roots clutching the sand like a prayer unfinished. Lucian sat beneath it, Bible in his lap, voice trembling as he read aloud, all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. He closed the book. Would you not take them if they were offered? Elias sat across from him. If they cost me silence, no. Lucian's eyes lifted, hollow and desperate. Then you would rather lose everything. Elias smiled faintly. If I lose everything and still find peace, was it loss at all? Lucian stared at him as though seeing something divine and unbearably human. The day grew hot. Lucian began to pace, muttering scripture under his breath. Each verse twisted against itself, bending into paradox. He will command his angels concerning you, he whispered, then laughed bitterly. And where are they now? Elias watched quietly. Unafraid. Maybe they're waiting, he said. For what? Lucian snapped. For your surrender. Elias shook his head. For your silence. Lucian froze. His lips parted, but no sound came. The desert swallowed his breath. For the first time, the one who had spoken only in scripture stood voiceless, the weight of his own words crushing him from within. Lucian's silence deepened until it became unbearable. He fell to his knees, clutching his throat, eyes wild. The wind rose softly, carrying whispers that might have been prayers or laughter. Elias approached and knelt beside him. Do you hear it now? He asked gently. Lucian nodded, tears streaking his dusted face. It's everywhere, he whispered, barely audible. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. It always was. Lucian's body trembled, his face breaking open with sorrow. For a fleeting instant his features softened. Less angel, less devil, more man. The wind shifted, carrying away his voice for the last time. By dusk, Lucian sat quietly, his voice gone, his gaze turned toward the dying sun. Elias remained near, neither victorious nor proud. The devil no longer looked like an adversary, just a man weary from eternity. As the sky bled crimson into violet, Elias whispered a final truth. Perhaps silence is not the absence of God, but the space where he begins. Lucian looked at him with something like peace. The wind sighed through the dunes, and when Elias turned again, Lucian was gone. Only the open Bible remained, its pages blank, waiting for a new word that would never be spoken. The night deepened into stillness. Elias sat beneath a sky jeweled with countless stars, their light soft as breath upon water. The wind that once roared now murmured low, like a lullaby meant for no one. He looked down at the empty Bible beside him, Lucian's last trace, and touched its blank pages as though they were living skin. For the first time in his life, he didn't search for meaning. He simply listened. The silence wasn't empty. It pulsed with the rhythm of his heartbeat, vast and alive. Somewhere in that hush he felt forgiveness. Wordless, boundless, he whispered into the void, if you are here, say nothing. I will understand. The silence answered. At dawn, Elias rose and began walking again, his bare feet sinking into the cool sand. The horizon glowed gold. A promise without words. He felt lighter, as though every doubt had been exhaled into the night. Ahead, a small figure stood waiting, a child, silent and still. Elias slowed, unsure whether to approach or kneel. The child said nothing, only raised a hand toward the rising sun. In that gesture, Elias saw every prayer ever spoken, every silence ever endured. Tears filled his eyes. The child smiled faintly, and the light behind him brightened until the world dissolved into gold. The light receded, and Elias found himself standing in a place both real and not. A flat expanse of sand that seemed to breathe. Mara's voice drifted through the air, gentle and distant. "You found him, didn't you?" Elias turned, but saw no one, only the echo of her presence woven through the breeze. "I found silence," he answered softly, "and in silence, everything." Her laughter sounded like wind chimes far away. "Then you finally learned how to listen." The air shimmered. Her voice faded, leaving him smiling. He no longer mourned her absence. In truth, she had never left. She had simply become part of the quiet. By noon, Elias reached a ridge overlooking a vast valley. Below him the desert stretched to infinity, untouched and silent. He remembered Father Anselm's words. God's silence is not absence, but invitation. For years, he had mistaken that invitation for rejection. Now he understood. It was the space where faith breathes. He knelt, eyes closed, letting the heat settle on his skin like blessing. In the quiet, he heard nothing. And yet, everything. The pulse of creation. The echo of his own heartbeat, answering it. The wind carried no verse, no command, only peace. As the sun began to set, Elias walked toward the horizon, the Bible cradled in his hands. Its pages were still blank, yet they felt full of everything that words could never hold. The child appeared once more, watching from afar. Elias raised the book, not as scripture, but as offering. "I will write nothing," he whispered, "so that you may speak." A final breeze passed through the dunes, soft as a sigh. The light dimmed, then steadied. Elias disappeared into the gold, leaving only footprints that the wind soon erased, and the desert, once mute, seemed to hum. A soundless song too holy for speech.